Like all first-year-olds, Sherry was experiencing life's little ups and downs. I'm so happy. I'm so sad. What did I do? It just ain't fair. But don't be fooled by this poor little Miak. Put a cake in front of her on her second birthday, and you can see a devious mind at work. Slurp. On February 16th, Vi and Fred Walker's son Bob married Anne O'Brien at St. Francis Xavier Church in Stony Creek, thus starting a new chapter in their lives. After the wedding, they left for a honeymoon in Hawaii. Eva wanted to show me her native country, so in April we got our passports renewed and flew to Budapest. We spent 10 days exploring the city, and what a beautiful city it is. Budapest is divided in half by the Danube River. Buda occupies the hilly left bank. Pest sprawls along the flat right bank. Several bridges span the river. The most historic part of the city is Castle Hill in Buda. It consists of the former royal palace and the old medieval town surrounded by walls and ramparts. The main gateway into the old town is Beichi Kapu. Just inside the gate is this pension where Eva and I stayed. It's just one of the hundreds of attractive historic buildings that line the streets of the old town. One of the most outstanding buildings is Matthias Church, which dates back to the 14th century. Several Hungarian kings were crowned here. Nearby is the Corona, the oldest coffee house in Budapest. All streets in the old town lead to the entrance gate to the royal palace. A royal palace has been on Castle Hill since the 13th century. The present one was built in the 18th century. It was destroyed in the Second World War, then reconstructed after the war. Castle Hill is surrounded by turrets, ramparts, and bastions. This is the Fisherman's Bastion, so called because it was built over a former fish market. From its turrets, a beautiful panorama unfolds of the lower town wedged between Castle Hill and the Danube. There's also a great view across the Danube to the Parliament building, with its domes and spires. The charming street Gulbaba Utsa is the prettiest way to walk down to the river, where the world-famous Gellert Spa Hotel and its thermal baths are located. On the other side of the Danube is the bustling city of Pest, which was mostly built in the 19th century. The best way to get around is by tram, which trundles past the major sites. The one pedestrian street in Pest is Váci Utca. It's lined with fashionable shops and restaurants. And at the end of the street is the Gerbo Cafe, a favorite haunt of Budapest's high society. After a day of sightseeing, we would freshen up at our pension and then enjoy dinner at one of the many charming restaurants in the Castle District. Our goulash and strudel were usually accompanied by a gypsy violinist. After a week in Budapest, we rented a Skoda and spent the next 12 days driving around Hungary. We followed the Danube River to Szentendre, a picturesque little town that has preserved its 18th century character. The main square has a Rococo cross erected by the townsfolk who survived the plague in the 1700s. The little village of Visegrad was the next stop along the Danube. It's crowned by the ruins of a royal palace and a mighty citadel high on a hill above the town. From the citadel there is a great view of the Danube Bend, where the river makes a right turn through the mountains. Next came the historic town of Esztergom. It's the religious capital of the country and is dominated by a huge domed cathedral and the ruins of a medieval royal castle that loom over the lower town. Lake Balaton is the largest lake in Central Europe. The old village of Tihan lies on a peninsula that protrudes out into the lake. A Benedictine church and monastery rise above the houses. A cliff-edge promenade leads to the church. The village itself has many old peasant homes built in the traditional style, with thatched roofs, stone walls partly plastered and whitewashed, and columned porches. At Badajon, an extinct coffin-shaped volcano rises dramatically into the sky. The lower slopes of the mountain are planted with terraced vineyards. Wine cellars dot the landscape. The rich volcanic soil and the sun's reflection from the lake make this a prime winemaking area. The lakeside village of Siglaget is dwarfed by the ruins of a 13th century castle. From the castle, there's a great view of the Badajon volcano in the distance. Leaving Lake Balaton, we headed inland to Tapolca, whose main square is built around a reservoir. Next came the old town of Veszprém, which stands on a huge jutting rock that rises steeply above its surroundings. A trail leads to the edge of a cliff overlooking the houses, yards, and gardens clustered around the base of the rock. In the small village of Fertud, we came to the magnificent 18th century Esterházy Palace. It's the largest and most beautiful palace in Hungary. Haydn was the court musician here for about 30 years. Sopron is perhaps the most historic city in Hungary. Many of its old buildings date back to the 15th century and remain intact today. This tower was a lookout. From the top, an approaching enemy or the outbreak of a fire could be spotted. Kőszeg is another historic walled town. A gate leads to the old town and the main square with its colorful old buildings. In the village of Jak, this beautifully restored 13th century church is the most important Romanesque building in Hungary. Its entrance is richly decorated with carvings and statues. Hévíz is Hungary's most famous spa. It's the largest natural thermal lake in Europe. In the city of Pécs, the main square is dominated by a 16th century Turkish mosque, a reminder that the Turks invaded Hungary in the 16th century and occupied the region for over 150 years. Nearby, Siklós has the most intact medieval castle in Hungary, and the only one that has been continuously lived in for over 700 years. Kalocsa is a pretty town famous for its folk art and folk customs. The local women paint, decorate, and embroider everything in an exuberant floral pattern. The eastern half of Hungary is known as the Alföld or Great Plain. Like the Canadian prairies, the land is entirely flat with only occasional villages to break the sweep of the horizon. We drove for miles along straight level roads past herds of longhorn cattle and twisty-horned sheep without spotting another human being. However, we did see several Gémiskút, the characteristic well of the plain. The quiet little town of Tokoly is nestled at the foot of a hill in northern Hungary. The hill is terraced and planted with vineyards. Wine cellars tunnel for over a mile into the hillside and contain more than 500,000 gallons of the world-famous Tokoly wine. But Holoka is perhaps the quaintest village in all of Hungary. It has old peasant houses with wooden porches and a little church with a wooden steeple. Many of the villagers still wear peasant costumes. This was our last stop before returning to Budapest and flying home to Toronto. That summer, Eve and I spent many a weekday evening at Ontario Place. After having dinner at one of the restaurants, we'd head to the Forum to catch performances by Sonny Rollins, Oscar Peterson, Count Basie, Woody Herman, and the Toronto Symphony. It was there that we saw the 26-year-old Mikhail Baryshnikov dance just 2 months after his high-stakes defection from the Soviet Union. That summer, Eve and I also caught Elton John at Maple Leaf Gardens and Liza Minnelli at the CNE Grandstand. On weekends, the two of us would drive up north to Muskoka, Halliburton, Georgian Bay, Algonquin Park, or the Bruce Peninsula. One weekend we drove down to Chautauqua in New York State and stayed at the famous St. Elmo Hotel. Meanwhile, that summer, Mom and Dad took a number of week-long camping trips. But the big news that summer was U.S. President Nixon's resignation on August 8th following the Watergate scandal. Gerald Ford was sworn in as the new president. In September, Eva got the disturbing news that her estranged husband, Gene Lantos, had committed suicide in Los Angeles. He was just 30 years old. To help Eva get over the shock, we took a 10-day driving tour of New England to see the fall colors. For Don and Gloria's daughter Sherry, the year passed quickly, and soon enough it was time for the two big annual events. Getting dressed up for Halloween, and opening the Christmas gifts that Santa had left. Then it was over to Grandma and Grandpa's home for more holiday treats. As for Linda and Doug, their son David was discovering all kinds of fun things to do in his second year. But next to grabbing a nap, the most fun thing was opening all those presents under the Christmas tree. Bev Matthews and her daughter Kathy had moved from St. Catharines to Jordan. Here they are with Sherry. Kathy was 9 years old. Here is Mom with Ed and Doris and their adopted daughter Susie, who was growing up fast. But it was the last chapter in the life of one family member. On December 19th, James Middaugh passed away at Metro Lodge in St. Catharines after a long illness. He was 92 years old. Mom and Dad, Ed and Doris, Fred and Vi, Bill and Elsie, Bob and Ann, all gathered at Vi and Fred's home for Christmas dinner. Having just lost their patriarch, it wasn't really a joyful occasion for the Middaugh family, but they put on a brave front.